while our modern world and mass media may have been caught off guard to some degree by the changes that we're seeing now, I have to tell you, our indigenous ancestors for 5,000 years have been telling us that we would live a time of tremendous change. Now, they had no way of knowing exactly what that change would mean, but it should not come as a surprise that we're living this time of extremes, because there are natural cycles and rhythms that are converging in a very rare way. We've never seen this in our lifetimes. We haven't seen it in recorded human history.
What's up, guys, and welcome to the Energy Motto. Today we have a very special guest, a man whose ideas, energy, and self-expression are impacting and evolving the worldview of millions. You see, Gregg Braden is an internationally renowned pioneer in the emerging paradigm based in science, social policy, and human potential. His background is in the earth sciences, from marine biology to geology. During the 80s and 90s, he explored a career as a technical operations manager in Cisco Systems, which led him to see the world in a problem-solving first way. He eventually ended up leaving the corporate world to write and teach full-time. To this date, his research has led to 15 film credits and 12 award-winning books and New York Times bestsellers such as Human by Design, The Divine Matrix, and his latest, The Wisdom Codes. Deepak Chopra called him a rare blend of scientist, visionary, and scholar with the ability to speak to our minds while touching the wisdom of our hearts. The UK's Watkins journal lists Gregg amongst the top 100 of the world's most spiritually influential living people for 7 consecutive years. He's a 2020 nominee for the highly prestigious Templeton Award, which honors extraordinary individuals who have devoted their talents to expand the vision of human purpose and ultimate reality. I first got to know Gregg from his mind-blowing series in Gaia called Missing Links. His incredible communication skills and passion led me to open my perspectives to new paradigms such as, are we living in a simulated reality? How are our brain and heart connected? And even, how does our reality reflect our inner world? Now he's speaking worldwide and partnering with visionary organizations such as the HeartMath Institute to extend the message of the new human paradigm. And it all boils down to this: we are much greater and more powerful than we think. So join us in this episode as Gregg tears down some previously thought limitations in our world, and we also get into pressing issues such as climate change, quantum fields, and coherence, what we can learn from ancient scriptures, and the new human story. So thank you guys for tuning in and seeking out this information. We want to invite you to help us grow this community by subscribing to this channel, follow us on Instagram, and let's keep the conversation going in the comments section. We love you and we are grateful to channel this wisdom on to you. So without further ado, we welcome you, the man who is innovating and merging science and spirituality, Gregg Braden.
Gregg Braden, brother, thank you for coming on the podcast. How are you doing?
I am doing so well, and I'm really happy to be with you today. I think it's an important time for us to be together like this. It's our first time working together, and I'm going to follow your lead because there's so many places where we could go. So I'm going to invite you, use your intuition. What's the best way to make the best use of the time that we have together today?
Perfect.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here, man. Hopefully it's not the last time we're working together, as you said. So
I'll be careful what you ask for. We might end up doing this tomorrow.
Let's do it. All right, Gregg. I'm having a little bit of difficulty knowing where to start because your expertise ranges from all different angles. Like, you can be talking about ancient civilizations, you can be talking about the heart, intuition. But I wanted to start off really in the present moment that we're in, because you were the first person to wake me up to the fact that we are living through a cycle. Really, what is going on is a breaking of the paradigms, a breaking of the systems. And given your expertise, given your wisdom, your life experiences, I maybe would have want to start with you giving your perspective on what is going on right now, why, like from a bigger picture, because when we're in fear, we're very narrow. So from your perspective, what is this cycle that we're going through as humanity?
Emilio, well, thank you for your kind words and your introduction. And, you know, I'm just this came to mind. I'm just going to share this with you. I was doing a radio interview last year before the pandemic, and it was on the East Coast where Avaro is right now. I won't name the name of the radio program because it was what we sometimes call a hostile interview.
Wow.
So when the interviewer asked me on, and he didn't say welcome, hello, you know, read a bio. The first thing he said, he says, "Gregg, why can't you stick with one topic like everybody else?" And I said, "Excuse me?" I thought he was kidding. I thought it was a joke. He said, "Man, you are all over the map." He said, "What are you talking about? Are you talking about ancient civilizations, magnetic fields of the earth, the human heart, spirituality?" He said, "Policy, politics, what are you talking about?" And I said, you know, if you look closely at every one of the books that I've written, they explore one facet of our relationship with our bodies, with one another, with the world around us. So in a very real sense, I have stayed with one topic. It's just a big topic, and the topic is us and our relationship to the world. And he said, "Okay, time for a break." And he went to break and he never came back. That was the end of the interview, right?
Oh, really? Oh, wow. Oh, my
God. So what I want to say is that we are the product of the way we have been taught to think about ourselves and our relationship to the world, our story. Now, when you say the word story, for some people, it sounds kind of airy-fairy, kind of nebulous. But I'm going to invite our viewers and our listeners to think about this. We solve every problem that comes to us every day, every moment of our lives. We solve that problem through the way we've been taught to think about our stories. Every relationship we invite, all the people we invite into our lives, it's based upon our story. The jobs that we choose, the jobs that we feel that we're even qualified for, the way we heal our bodies, it's all based upon our story. That's important because we're living in a COVID world right now. The policies that we embrace, the laws that we agree to live our lives according to, they are all based upon our story. So all of a sudden, you begin to see our story. It's not just some nebulous conversation out here. It's like front and center. It's up for us right now. Because we've been led to believe a story that's not true. We've been led to believe that we live in a world that is a static world that doesn't change. And the truth is, our world is a very dynamic world. I'm a scientist. I'm a degreed geologist with a strong background in the life sciences, marine biology, molecular biology, math, physics, computer science, cosmology, archaeology. And I say that because it is that background that has helped me to come to terms with the dynamic world that we live in. We live in a world of cycles. Nature functions in rhythms and cycles. So while our modern world and mass media may have been caught off guard to some degree by the changes that we're seeing now, I have to tell you, our indigenous ancestors for 5,000 years have been telling us that we would live a time of tremendous change. Now, they had no way of knowing exactly what that change would mean, but it should not come as a surprise that we're living this time of extremes, because there are natural cycles and rhythms that are converging in a very rare way. We've never seen this in our lifetimes. We haven't seen it in recorded human history, where there are natural rhythms and cycles. Some of those we know about, some we don't. Climate, for example, is one of the rhythms, one of the natural cycles that is changing, and it's always changing. Climate is dynamic, so it's not static. And as a geologist, I love to talk about this. I talk about it all day. Yeah. If we look at the ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica that record every year of climate for over 400,000 years. And in those layers of ice, we can see how much carbon dioxide was in the atmosphere, how strong was the sun, how strong were the magnetic fields, how high were the oceans. We can see that. And what we see is that there are rhythms and there are cycles within cycles, 5,000-year cycles, 10,000, 26,000, 41,000, 100,000-year cycles. And they were happening before humans ever emerged on the earth. So we are not the cause. We have contributed. We have to say that. We've contributed, but we are not the cause. So in and of itself, we are living a time where the cycles tell us we should be experiencing a shift in climate. But that's not all. We're also living the convergence of a cycle of economics. Now, when people hear about economies, they think about money. But economies don't have to be about money. Economies are about relationships and how people and communities and societies and nations share vital resources like food and energy and water and medicine. Money may be involved, but I have lived with indigenous communities that don't use money at all, that have very, very robust economies. And we happen to be living in the close of an economic and an innovation cycle, which means by definition the birth of a new economy and a new innovation cycle. And the third major cycle right now is we are living a time, and this is a really unusual thing for many people to hear about. Human conflict occurs in cycles. I had the opportunity to speak with my dear friend, my scientific colleague, and my spiritual brother, Bruce Lipton. We were at the United Nations in New York City, and they asked us to talk about what we saw happening in the world, what we could expect. So they were looking for ideas of how to plan resources and allocate money and funding. And when I mentioned conflict cycles, they said, how come we've never heard of this? What the best science of the modern world is telling us is that social coherence and even the way that we relate to the people that we share our homes with, our relationships, our lives, all are influenced. I'm going to be very conscious with that word. They're not governed and we are not slaves to the cycle, but we are susceptible and vulnerable to influences of magnetic fields of our planet, magnetic fields of the sun, and we are in a very low, a record low magnetic point right now, in between solar cycles. We're between solar cycle 24 and 25. What that means, I'll just give you the quick equation, is that when the magnetic fields are low, scientists know that humans are more aggressive. We're less willing to cooperate to solve our problems. And the reverse is when they're high. Well, we're living this perfect storm. 2020 happens to be the lowest point in the magnetic fields right between those solar cycles. The economy obviously is shifting, very volatile right now, and climate. And you put all of those together into a global population that now is globalized. So we're trying to come together as a global family, working within a set of parameters that we've known in the past. Those parameters changed. That means our thinking must change. And the way that we think and live our lives has got to change. We need a new human story.
Yeah.
All right? So here's the deal. Our story, we are steeped in a story of competition, conflict, and struggle. We are led to believe that we are the product of random processes, this is Darwinism, random mutations.
Is this the theory, like also the theory of evolution, how competition, the survival of the fittest?
This is it. So we're led to believe that we are essentially lucky biology, random mutations, created forms of life that competed with one another, and that competition is what has led to our success as a species. This is the story. So now think about what's happening. We're globalizing a planet. That's true. And we're trying to do it by dealing with one another based upon the thinking that competition and struggle and conflict and scarcity is the fundamental rule of nature. Here's the problem. The best science of the modern world has overturned all of that. The best science of the 21st century tells us we are not the product of completely random processes. There is something, we have to say, there is something that has happened in our past that transcends the random processes. And the best science has told us that this is most important. The fundamental rule of nature is cooperation. It's not competition. So if we want to successfully meet the challenges that we that have arrived at our collective doorsteps, I think our best bet is to honor our relationship with nature and the natural world, honor that nature's model of cooperation. And I mean, I think about this. What would it mean to have a generation of young people from the moment they begin in school, in kindergarten, from the moment they begin to understand their relationship to the world and the kids around them, to think in terms of cooperation and working together? In other words, what can I offer? What can I give? What can I share? How can I contribute? Which is very different from what we're led to believe of what can I get? What's in it for me? How do I benefit? All right. And we are all steeped in this story. So our economic model that's struggling is based in the false assumptions of competition and conflict. Our corporate model is based in
everything.
Everything. So it's up for us right now. So this right now, we're living this rare convergence of the cycles that have changed the world as we have known it. And the new world that's emerging, the struggle and the suffering, comes from us trying to embrace that world through the old thinking of false assumptions of an obsolete science. Now, we've asked science to tell us who we are. And science has done a really good job. There are a lot of scientists that don't like the answer.
Yeah.
Science has been hijacked by corporations. They cherry pick the data. By politics, they cherry pick the data. Climate change is a perfect example of how that's happening. Science has been hijacked by corporations, by politics, by religion, and by academia for reasons of money and power and ego and habit. And this is where we find ourselves now. And I believe that we're witnessing the breakdown of these old structures, these old ways of thinking, because we're living in a new world. And then I'll stop here. It takes one generation. One generation has to be the generation that lives the old world that is crumbling and also lives the new world that's not quite fully developed yet. So you're living in between these two worlds, and it takes a really strong person or a strong family or a strong community or a strong nation or a strong planet to live in this in-between time without getting lost in the fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
This is where the new human story comes in, because the new science is giving us the reasons not to fear.
Yeah.
If we are willing to embrace that science. So it's a long answer to a short question, but it lays the foundation for everything I think we're going to talk about.
I wanted to highlight right there what you just said, because it's really fascinating in your book, The Divine Matrix, that field, that underlying field that connects everything, our beliefs, our consciousness, all of these things. You were making the point in that book that you only need a square root of a 1%. And that took me a while to understand, but it really gets to the fact that only a small group of people can influence that field and the beliefs going towards the next generations, the next future. So I wanted to ask you, how can we start, especially our younger generations, how can we start shifting those beliefs through our actions or through our demands on what we want from businesses, economies, and all this?
It's a good question. So the book, first of all, thank you for mentioning The Divine Matrix. It was very healing. Yeah, well, thank you. It was healing for me to write that book. It was written in 2007, published in 2008. And this is how far we have come. When that book was published, it was considered fringe science. or pseudoscience is what some people called it, although the book was based upon peer-reviewed, rock-solid science that simply wasn't common knowledge.
Yeah.
Since that time, the book has gone from being thought of as a fringe book. It is now required reading in some physics classes in the United States and Canada right now.
That's amazing. Yeah.
And we now know more than we knew in 2007. So in 2007, there were studies that were done of how many people it would take to influence consciousness in a population. And for that to happen, you have to assume there is a field of energy that is connecting those people, holding everything together. So at that time, the studies suggested that in populations of 10,000 people or greater, that it took a certain number of people to influence the consciousness in those populations. And that number was the square root of 1% of the population. So you calculate 1%, and then you take the square root of that. Since that time, while those numbers are important, and obviously the more people we have, I think the more effect we have quicker. What the studies now suggest, now we know more about quantum fields. Mm-hmm. And the studies now suggest it's less about the sheer number of people and more about the quality of the consciousness that number of people embody, suggesting it can take a relatively few number of people to really embrace what is called coherence. We have the ability to create physiological coherence in our bodies, and that coherence influences the field around us. And when people create that coherence in their bodies, what we find is the number of traffic accidents declines, and the number of violent crimes decline, and the number of assaults on people declines. So we know there's a direct correlation between the coherence that we create within ourselves and how that influences our families, our workplace, our classroom, ultimately our communities and entire nations. So it's interesting because the science continues to support the fact that we are deeply connected in ways that we're only beginning to understand. And now the science is searching for ways to apply that connection. And this is where science and our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions come together, not necessarily religion. Religion is about the rules and the dogma created by humans regarding their relationship to the world around them and maybe to the cosmos and the higher power. But the spiritual principles existed long before the religions. So when we go into our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions in North America, Native American traditions are commonly referred to, or in the Andes Mountains of southern Peru, the shamans and the healers and the mystics, and in the monks and the nuns in Tibet, and the Buddhist traditions, and the mystics and the yogis in India and Nepal. They're all different from one another. But the common thread that brings them all together is they all looked to something within themselves to help optimize who they were, and in the presence of the best version of themselves, that influenced the world around them. And science now is bearing this out. Science is on our side when it comes to our ability to self-regulate our own biology. No other form of life can do what we can do. We're the only form of life that can consciously sit down in a moment in time and choose. Say, in this moment, I choose to strengthen my immune response. Now, who doesn't want that in a global pandemic world, a stronger immune system? We're the only form of life that can consciously choose to awaken the longevity enzymes. And when we talk about longevity, it's not just living longer. If you're living longer, it means you're healing, you're rejuvenating, you're regenerating. We're the only form of life that can do that. Self-regulating our biology. We're the only form of life that can access deep states of intuition on demand. Super cognition, super memory, super recall. I used this when I was in college. On demand. We're the only form of life that can create resilience to a changing world on demand. No other form of life can do this consciously.
Why is that?
And it's because our ability to self-regulate our biology is what gives us the evolutionary edge to thrive, not to survive, but to thrive and create a better world on the other side of where we are right now. Once we begin to understand that, I think we begin to look at what's happening in our world a little differently. Yeah. If we don't know what I just said, here's what happens. When the world begins to change, there's a fear. And in that fear, people, communities, societies, governments, nations will try to cling to an image and an idea of the familiar world of the past. Yeah. We can't go back to that world because it doesn't exist. That world is gone. And this is where the suffering comes from, because we're trying to apply the way we've been taught to deal with the past. All right, we're trying to apply that in a new world, but the new world doesn't work like the world of the past. Yeah. So we need new ways of thinking, new ways of living, and it comes down to something very simple, two things. The most simple is about love. The bottom line, do we love ourselves enough to live our lives in a way that gives our bodies what they need to do what they know how to do really well? Do we love ourselves enough to live and to think in a way that allows the best version of ourselves and the best versions of our families and communities to come forward? And the science tells us how to do that. Science is telling us what we need to do to self-regulate our immune system. And it's all the things we already know: diet, exercise, nutrition. But there are new discoveries in terms of diet, new discoveries in terms of exercise and nutrition. I mean, just for example, when I was back in my 30s, 40s, and 50s, back in those days, I was taught that steady state exercise was the key. So you go out and you'd run a half marathon, or you run on the treadmill for an hour, or whatever it is. Now we know that may not be the optimum form of exercise. Yeah. For a lot of people. What now, the human body is built for what's called HIIT, high intensity interval training. That's our biology is based upon that. When we optimize our biology, that's about hormone balance. It's about testosterone in men and women, estrogen in men and women, DHEA levels, and all of those things. We know that we have a new class of stem cells has just been discovered. We used to think that people lose stem cells as they age, and we now know that you can be 100 years old and have access to stem cells. Maybe not as easy, but they didn't disappear. It's how you get to them. And nutrition and movement are keys to doing this. So do we love ourselves enough to give our bodies what they need to do what they are made to do? And when we begin to embrace that mastery, all of a sudden change looks a lot less scary. Yeah. When we become the best versions of ourselves, we fear the outer world, that change, less. We fear one another less. And perhaps most importantly, we fear our own power. We are extraordinarily powerful beings, and we're taught to discount and deny that power. Yeah. And in our powerlessness, this is what's happening in the world right now. There's a lot of hurt in the world for a lot of reasons. We typically are not taught how to heal that hurt. So what happens is the hurt needs to be expressed, and it's expressed as fear, and it's expressed as hate. Unresolved hurt becomes the fear and the hate in the world, and we're seeing a world of hurt. When we begin to resolve the hurt that we have within us, with a lot of reasons, we're all experiencing loss. We're mourning the loss of a way of life. Every one of us has lost something. Yeah. We've lost freedoms. We've lost family members. We've lost jobs and careers. If you don't know how to heal that, there's a lot of hurt that comes with that. And that hurt can be expressed as fear for what the unknown, and as hate for those that represent something other than what we're familiar with. So all of this is up for us right now. And the science is giving us the tools that allow us to transcend, not just survive, but to transcend. But to do it, we've got to let go of the old ways of thinking. And I think that's probably the hardest thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we just covered a lot of ground there, didn't we?
A lot. That was amazing. Wow. Thank you for saying all those things.
Thank you so much, Greg. Sorry about that, Emilio.
So, well, let me ask you guys. I don't know what your ages are. I'm closer to 70 than I am to 60 right now. And I think you all probably represent a very different
generation.
How old do I look?
Let's say I shaved yesterday.
To me, you guys look ageless. You're my brothers. You look ageless. I don't even think about an age when I see you. But I know that we're probably talking about different generations. So let me ask you. It's your program, but I'm just going to ask you, how does your community see the people that you associate with in your community? How do they feel about what's happening in the world?
I think it's a lot of mixed emotions. I mean, as you said, there's a convergence of cycles. So there's the cycle of the climate. For that, in that area, I think our generation is extremely moving forward. A lot of their purpose, a lot of their conscious and energies is towards helping that. There's also the cycle of innovative technologies, as you said, right? And that's a difficult one. I saw one of your interviews talking about the Neuralink with Elon Musk. That's one of those things where you never know what can happen with that. And it can be such a transformation in our humanity. So there's so much that, to answer your question, there's mixed emotions.
Yeah, well, and this is the key. This is the key. How can we solve the problems if we're not honest with ourselves about the problems? And that, I think, is probably the biggest hurdle, because there are so many competing agendas that are out there right now. So many competing agendas. Climate is I've been talking about climate as a geologist. I love to talk about climate. Yeah. Because I was studying this back in the 70s, when I was in the corporations. Climate change is real. It's a fact, and that's the whole point. It's not to deny it, but it's also to recognize our relationship to the climate. So let me just give you a perfect example. When I was at the UN, those people, we're being led to believe that we can stop the climate change. And I think it's very disingenuous, because we didn't start it. We cannot stop it. It was happening. If you look at the ice core charts, going back 400,000 years, we appeared 200,000 years ago, and the rhythms are the same before we appeared, which means we did not create it. So here's where the honesty comes in. If we were honest with ourselves, we would say, we are living a time of dynamic climate change. We definitely need to go green, go clean, stop burning fossil fuels. And let me tell you, we have had the technology to produce energy for every human on the face of the earth that wants that energy. I've learned not all communities want electricity. Some don't. Some indigenous communities don't. We've had the technology to create clean, green, sustainable energy inexpensively, burning zero fossil fuels and creating zero greenhouse gases. And we've had that technology for over 70 years. And the fact that it is not being brought forward tells me that those powers that be are not really serious about climate the way we're being led to think.
Yeah. What would you say are the motivations driving all that? Money,
power, ego, habit. If we were serious, I'm just going to give you a very simple example. If
habit is a big one. Habit is a big one.
It is a big one. Yeah. If we were serious about this, and Alvaro, you said you're on the East Coast. Are you in the Northeast by any chance?
In Florida.
Oh, Miami. You're in Florida. Okay. Well, up in the New England area, for example, scientists have known that the climate change would create stronger storms. We've known that for a long time. That means that we're going to have bigger snowstorms, and these ice storms that happen where the ice clings to power lines and so heavy the power lines collapse, the power poles collapse. If we were honest with ourselves, this is called adaptive resilience. If we were honest with ourselves, we would say, we are living a time of climate change. It makes sense to expect the unexpected. Let's bury those power lines underground so that no matter what happens, we haven't seen the last big storm. We haven't seen the last of the ice. So no matter what happens, people still have power. They still have heat. They still have lights. They still have electricity. They still have communications. Hospitals are open. And then the climate is not such it doesn't hurt us. We don't suffer as much because we've been honest with ourselves. But it is the denial of saying, oh, it's a once in a lifetime storm, never happen again, and then it happens the next year. And it's the belief that we can stop this rhythm. You cannot stop the rhythm. We can adapt to the rhythm, and then it becomes less of a problem. And we need to stop contributing to the problem. We need to stop, and we, like I said, we have the technology to do that. So that's just one example of where our story is so important. Because if we're honest with ourselves, we've asked science to tell us who we are and to tell us what our relationship is with the earth. That includes climate. Science is doing that. And the data is being cherry-picked. It's being hijacked for other agendas. And a lot of scientists are pushing back on the science. So, it's a really interesting place where we find ourselves. Science, we've asked science to tell us who we are as beings on the earth, what our capability and our potential is. And the science is saying, humans, you have the ability to self-regulate your biology. You can create a strong immune system on demand. But we're being taught that we are vulnerable and we're susceptible to things outside of us. Rarely are we taught to love ourselves enough to live our lives and give our bodies what they need to do what they already know how to do really, really well.
Yeah. And Gregg, you have like a fascinating ability to merge concepts from the ancient worlds to what's going on right now, presently with science. I wanted to ask you also, from the ancient perspective, I know you've dove deep into the scriptures, the ancient texts, their own creation stories. There's millions of different variations of that. But what have you found that is a pattern in each of those stories that you've read from the ancients that we can apply into our lives now?
One of those, that's a good question, and I appreciate that. I was conditioned to discount our past as insignificant. I was conditioned as a scientist. My training taught me that modern science is where the action is. That's where all the juice is. And the old stuff, it could be interesting, but it's not significant. Well, here's what's happened. The new discoveries are revealing so many anomalies to the ancient story. They used to take all those anomalies and they'd put them over here and they'd say, this is an anomaly, we'll come back and study it later. So for example, I was taught that civilization began 5,000 years ago in ancient Sumeria. Yeah. So now that we're looking at 8,000 and 10,000-year-old civilizations, scientists say, okay, well, that's an anomaly. Well, here's what's happening. So many anomalies have accumulated, they're telling a new story. And what I sense is the information ancient? Absolutely. Is it obsolete? Absolutely not. There is a continuity of human experience and human wisdom. And while our ancestors may not have been scientists in the way that we think of science today, they had an understanding and a direct knowledge of our relationship to our bodies. And much of that has been preserved through traditions that we always thought were fringe, like yoga, for example, or like meditation. Our ancestors understood our relationship to the cosmos in ways that we're only beginning to understand. Perfect example, the Dogon in Africa, they have a dance that they do, and when anyone tries to mimic that, if they make a mistake, the Dogon say, no, it's got to be this way. And so the scientist, the anthropologist said, why? What is the significance of that dance? They said, we are dancing the orbit of the dark star in Sirius. And the scientist said, there is no dark star. There's Sirius A. It's, you see it, they're coming down from the belt of Orion. And the Dogon said, no, this is Sirius B. It's the one you cannot see. And it wasn't until 20th century astronomers were able, through radio telescopes, they said, my God, there is another star, a Sirius B, that we can't see. How did the Dogon know? Not only that it existed, how did they know what that orbit looked like relative to the other? And I'm just one example. So there is a continuity of knowledge. And I think if we can stop seeing ourselves as elite as a civilization and recognize that we're part of a continuity of human experience and knowledge, and we owe it to ourselves to embrace what our ancestors left for us so that we can thrive in places where they may have failed. And also, and I mean, there's a whole conversation we can have about this, the records of the civilizations appear in roughly 5,000 year cycles. And at the end of those 5,000, so 5,000 years ago, when we're taught that civilization began, that was just our most recent cycle. Yeah. It now is very clear. There was another one that happened before that, and another one before that.
Up to 200,000, right? Up to how many thousands of years before that?
Well, humans have been here 200,000 years. Mm-hmm. We right now have evidence going back into the Ice Age of advanced technological civilizations. But here's the key. They failed right about those 5,000 year marks, and it appears that they failed because of war, because of conflict.
Oh, wow.
They reach a point where something happens, and what's interesting is the climate change cycles correlate with the war. Yeah. So when the climate changes, resources become scarce. It may be difficult to grow food because the seasons have changed. So if war has brought an end to human civilization in the past, and we are living the same cycles, the question is, are we following the same patterns now? And if we are, can we recognize that and awaken to that fact so that we don't succumb to those cycles, so that we work together, cooperate, which is what science tells us. Nature is based upon cooperation. Can we work together to not just survive, but to thrive and transcend? We have done amazing things in the past. We've achieved great and beautiful things in the past. And the question is, if we've done those things in the past, and we now have about 8 billion people on the planet and technology like we've never seen, how far can we go this time? How beautiful of a world can we create? And rather than trying to bring everybody's standard of living down, can we elevate the standard of living for everyone, which I believe is possible, and it is the way to go because the new technologies will support that without destroying our environment. We've got to get through the thinking, the limited thinking of the past. And that is the great challenge of this bridging generation. It takes one generation to live what has been known as it collapses, while what is yet to be is not fully in place, and not get lost in the fear. And that's where you and me and our community, that's where our generations are right now. And I'll tell you, I'm an optimist. I've never been more optimistic. I'm also a realist. Realistically, we're going to go through some stuff to get to where we're going. And this is us getting through the stuff, having these conversations.
Shit's going to go down.
Well, it is. It's happening right now. But it's all about our perspective. Mm-hmm. When you see unsustainable, if you look closely, the only things that are breaking are the unsustainable ways of thinking and living. That's good news for me. The economic system that is so volatile and the powers that be are striving to preserve, it's a broken system. It cannot continue the way that it is. But it's based upon competition, conflict, and survival of the strongest. That's not the fundamental rule of nature. Cooperation is. So here's the good news. I want to end with a lot of good news. We have so much good news. We already have all the food we need on this planet to feed every mouth of every child, every woman, every man. It is not the lack of food that is the reason our global family, our brothers and sisters are hungry right now. It's a lack of priority for that food to get where it needs. And we need leadership for that. And I'm not saying it has to be American leadership or European. I'm just saying the thinking. We need to think in terms of helping our global family. We already have the technology for 70 years, as I mentioned, to create electricity, zero fossil fuels, zero greenhouse gases, inexpensively through elements that every nation on the face of the earth has in their soil. We've had this since the Manhattan Project. We already know how to create businesses based upon cooperation and sharing rather than competition and scarcity. We already know how to do that. Every organ in the human body has been documented with the ability to heal itself and reverse disease, even the ones we were told could not.
Yeah.
Brain tissue, spinal cord tissue, heart tissue, pancreatic tissue. The key to all of and more, the key to all of this is a shift in thinking. We've got to give ourselves the environment, the opportunity for the new thinking based upon, it's not wishful thinking, it's based upon rock solid science that simply is not shared in the mainstream, not shared in the universities. You won't see this stuff in the classrooms and the textbooks.
You won't see it.
Yeah, but this is where we owe it to ourselves now, and the technology gives us the ability to do due diligence. You can find this stuff on your own. You don't, and it's it's not through some dark web, website of some conspiracy, channel. This is out there in peer-reviewed journals. It is not been integrated into the story. It's like an obscure journal here talks about the ability for the human body to heal itself, and an obscure journal over here talks about people that have applied this and now are 120 years old, which you find in, I've been with some of those people, 123 years old. So it's about bringing together, we owe it to ourselves to draw upon the best science of the modern world, the wisdom of 5,000 plus years of human experience, to weave that into a wisdom that's greater than anything we have today, without judging, one as better than another. We're humans having this experience. We owe it to ourselves. And I know it's happening, so I'm not going to say if. I'll say as we embrace the deep truth of who we are, our relationship to our bodies and the world around us, we've got a world ahead of us like couldn't even imagine in a million years. A beautiful, beautiful new human story emerging. That's my story, and I'm sticking with it.
That's amazing, Greg. And I just wanted to acknowledge you because you're really opening up possibilities for humanity. That's what I'm most fascinated about your work. And we can start wrapping this up because I know we're taking a lot of your time.
That's why we're here.
It's fascinating because I believe that you coming on this show was meant to be, because either way, I think the purpose of this show had a lot of ideas from you and a lot of inspiration from you, because the name of this show is the Energy Motto. And when we were thinking of a name, that the name energy came to us, and then we gave a definition to it. And we said that the energy are the untapped sources of internal energy that all humans hold to unveil extraordinary physical, mental, and spiritual capabilities. One of our wrap-up questions for you, Greg, is what unleashes that energy in your life?
In my life, personally, the power of beauty. I recognized early in my lifetime, I'll just answer the question. I am the product of a very unhealthy, dysfunctional, abusive, alcoholic family. And my father was the abuser, and my mother, my young brother, and I got the bad end of that. And at a very early age, for refuge, I turned to beauty. And I found that beauty in music. I became a musician at an early age. I'm still a musician to this day. When I'm not, I was a musician long before I was ever an author. But also in the world around me. And I recognize that in the presence of beauty, I am changed as a person. And beauty, I now live in the American desert Southwest. I'm coming to you from a studio outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico, surrounded by indigenous wisdom. One of those indigenous traditions is the Navajo. And the Navajo embrace beauty as a force of nature, just like gravity, magnetism, the strong and the weak nuclear force. They say beauty is the fifth force. And there is a prayer that's a long prayer that is abbreviated into 3 lines. And I say this prayer to myself at least once a day, every day. The prayer simply says, the beauty that I live with, the beauty that I live by, the beauty upon which I base my life. So the beauty I live with reminds us that we don't have to create the beauty. It exists in all things. It's already there.
Yeah.
Our job is to find it. The beauty I live by allows us to give that beauty a place of significance in our lives. It's more than just an aesthetic. And the beauty upon which I base my life is the opportunity, it's the invitation every day to allow beauty in all things to be the cornerstone from which I personally view everything that happens in my life, from the lightest of the light to the darkest of the dark. And when we begin to live, I'll say for me personally, when I began to apply these principles in my life changed. And I think it's important to keep things in perspective. It can look very dark if we are swayed by the agendas of media and corporations that want us to think a certain way. It can look really dark. Yeah. And then you go for a walk in nature and none of that stuff exists. And that's the truth. That's where we find our truth. So I think that's a daily practice. It's our workshop in life for each of us to find the beauty that already exists and allow that to be a foundation of our life choice.
That's beautiful.
It is beautiful. That's the beauty.
Yeah.
Hey, brothers, I do have another interview I'm going to go to. I want to thank you for your courage in creating this podcast, your trust in inviting me. We've never worked together. The truth is you have no idea what I was going to say, and I appreciate your trust. Maybe we should call this Volume 1. And,
Volume 1. Part 1.
Yeah, we'll pick it up. We'll pick it up, and I look forward to the next time. So if we were in a room, I'd give you both a big immune boosting hug.
Big virtual high five, hug, whatever. Yep. Thank you so much, Gregg. We appreciate you immensely. Keep doing the amazing work and shifting paradigms.
Thank you. I love you both. I love our community. Thank you all.
Love, brother. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Ciao.